Welcome everyone to this new episode of the Privacy Rules Privacy Espresso series, a series where we delve into the latest news on privacy and data protection from all over the world. And we do that with a member of the Privacy Rules Alliance and sometimes also with guest speakers out of it. But today with me, I have Charlotte Riley from the cybersecurity firm CSS Assure based in the UK, partner of Privacy Rules. And we are going to discuss about a topic that is extremely important, in particular in this period, given some recent news. Also because we're going to have an event in a month, less than a month from now, where we are going to discuss about it. But before speaking about that, Charlotte, thanks a lot for being with us. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, Alessandro. Great to see you again. Great to be talking about this subject on the Espresso, we call it.
Yes, exactly, like a coffee shot, as we used to do in Italy.
Yes.
And yes, Charlotte, I invited you today as a cybersecurity expert because the trend of the last period has been the one of seeing more and more regulatory framework that are not just requiring legal compliance, legal duties to be compliant with the framework, but also lots of cybersecurity requirements with them. And this is also why I was mentioning our event, where we will be speaking about a session that is related to cybersecurity and privacy at Crossroads.
Yes.
We have seen recently the NIS2 framework that is a hot topic. But of course, before going to that specific framework, I would like to receive also an update from you on, which has been your experience in the last period on this trend and what you have been witnessing as a professional in the sector.
Of course. So, as we know, governments worldwide, and particularly in the EU, enacting regulatory frameworks to bolster, as you just mentioned, not only privacy and data protection, but cybersecurity controls to enable both of those things. So as we know, NIS2 has just come into law, and that really we'll talk about it in more detail. But essentially, we at CSS Assure work across both national frameworks, but also sector-specific frameworks, and essentially all of those frameworks cover privacy, data protection, and cybersecurity, even though they are distinct principles. As we know, privacy represents the fundamental right for a person to keep their data private and secure from unauthorized access. Data protection, focusing on the safeguarding of that data and the regulatory laws around collecting it and processing it. And then cybersecurity are the principles that protect that data. So what the reason that the governments have approached it this way is one doesn't really work without the other. You can have data protection law to protect privacy, but if there aren't any technical measures in place to protect that information, then at the end of the day, you're not going to achieve the goal of the framework in the first place. So what we're seeing is, and as I said, this is across frameworks like GDPR, NIS2, we can go on, but also sector-specific frameworks in healthcare, for example. And the goal at the end of the day is privacy and sometimes safety in these frameworks, and then supported by cybersecurity.
Hello, Charlotte. And I have one more question while listening to you, because in some ways everyone could say normally you would expect privacy and cybersecurity to go hand by hand. So there was really a need for regulatory frameworks, and why this need, in your opinion, as a professional? Is there a need, for example, to identify a certain security level, or to require companies to standardize somehow the way in which they approach security? Why do we see this push that we are having in the last years and months into this direction?
So at the end of the day, cybersecurity can mean many things to many different people. And you, depending on your risk profile, you can take some basic steps, or you can understand that actually your risk profile is much higher, as we're seeing in critical national infrastructure, for example, in NIS2, and there has to be a standard. There has to be some standardization to say these are the controls that need to be in place, but also to what standard, because each company can have their own approach, and whether that works or not, it's open to interpretation, isn't it? Or it's, we'll see, I suppose, at the other side of whether that data is breached and accessed. But there needs to be something there to support and control what is put in place to support these organizations with these high risk profiles.
Yeah, I think one of the key points indeed is the one on the organizational side, meaning you can implement both the purely legal part of it,
yes,
and the purely cybersecurity part of it. But if organization-wide you don't have a system that communicates well and that works well, then you can probably lose most of the work you've been doing to protect your company just because you didn't have it working in the right direction.
So when we first saw GDPR come out, there was a scramble, a lot of work to put the legal infrastructure in place, the legal framework. At CSS Assure, we cover both. So we do data protection. We are in the same group as a law firm, so we're supported by legal teams for the policy work, and also to make sure companies are legally compliant. But on the cybersecurity side, there was a gap. So as we know, in the GDPR, it does say that you have to have appropriate cybersecurity controls in place. And I think what these escalation of more cybersecurity focused frameworks are addressing is that is ambiguous. So what is appropriate security controls? And that did need to be addressed, and that's why we're seeing a change in that.
Yeah, and speaking about this, I think it's time to open the other big topic of today, NIS2. So, which are the key requirements? What do you believe it's the really, relevant part of this new framework that, all European countries have to comply with now?
Well, so there are a few things that happened. As we know, there are some pretty menacing fines that come along with NIS2, which are a driver for the organisations that are in scope to take action, because we know that unfortunately this is the way things work. There has to be an implication if these regulations aren't met. The scope has also increased, so it was critical infrastructure, energy systems, healthcare networks, and transportation services. And now this is expanded to cover more sectors, and they've divided those into essential entities and important entities. It also applies to smaller organizations. It covers now the supply chain, so you're obligated to manage your supply chain risks as well as your own organizational risks. And in terms of cybersecurity risk management, it's more specific. So it's actually saying you have specific controls that you have to put in place, and specific governance obligations and mandatory security measures, including incident prevention. So this is something we see with many of our clients. They have some technical controls, but they're not prepared for an incident. So at the end of the day, you can have quite robust security technical controls, cybersecurity, but if you're not prepared for an incident, you're not able to contain, mitigate, recover, then you're not in a great situation to minimize the impact of that incident. And of course, if you're in one of these critical infrastructure or in scope of NIS organizations, that can be catastrophic. Also, in terms of detecting an incident and responding to it. So again, that you can have some basic cybersecurity controls, but if you've not got something quite sophisticated in play in terms of being able to detect and respond to a digital threat, which can go undetected, as we know, then you can still be at a really high risk that something has happened, you don't know about it, and this can escalate quite quickly. So it seems to me that these frameworks are really getting to the crux of the standard, as we've talked about, of what these control sets need to be.
Charlotte, you mentioned that you've been working with law firms into these type of frameworks in particular. I understand, and maybe you can simply confirm that from what you're saying is essential to have this type of cooperation of different backgrounds and different professional subject and experts together in order to comply with those framework. Am I right? Is that your experience? I mean, and I'm also hearing that basically you identified 3 steps, before any incident, during the incident, and after the incident.
Yes.
You need to be prepared to all those phases according to those frameworks, and that's what you're working on exactly, right?
Yes, exactly. So when we're looking at these frameworks, we're 100% looking at governance obligations, and so there are different disciplines and controls that need to be looked at. So there is policy, of course. There is being legally compliant. There is a lot of this that needs to be covered by legal teams. You need a specialist, or you need specialist legal support if a breach was to happen, because you need to report this to the regulators, the authorities, and you need to understand your legal risk in these situations. There is then the work that needs to be done underneath all of that. So in terms of making sure that you're compliant with the framework. So a data protection cybersecurity company like us needs to come in and really do gap analysis and understand where you are against the framework. And then you can carve out and say, well, here's the action plan. What do we need to do on the legal front? Where do we need to prepare ourselves? What do we need to do in terms of incident response? Which technical controls are we missing and that we need to put in place and put a project plan in place for? So you need all of these, I would say, we call them pillars, right? But these areas of consultancy to make sure you've got 100% coverage and that you're compliant with the framework.
Yeah, and having a good flow between all of them.
Exactly, and everybody being on the same page, aligned, and working towards, like in any project, right? You're working towards the same goal.
Indeed, that requires, as you said, a lot of prevention activity or preventive activity to make sure that everything run and to be prepared, which is something, of course, that we strongly invite our followers to do. I have just one last quick question, because that's very often related to NIS2, that is standards like ISO standards and similar. Does it mean being, compliant with one of those standards? Does it also mean being compliant with NIS2, or there are still some things that needs to be done? Just in a minute, because we are finishing our time.
Okay, so there is cohesion between the cybersecurity standards within these frameworks. So ISO 27001, of course, is a cybersecurity standard that has a control set in it. Now, NIS2 requires you to have cybersecurity controls in place, and the two are aligned. You can map the two and say, well, save your goal, and because of your customer base or whatever it is that is driving you to comply with these frameworks, you can approach the work for both of them, or one could drive the other. You could have ISO 27001 in place, and you can say, okay, what control set do we have here? We've been audited against it. We understand where we are. Now, how does that relate to the NIS2 framework? And what else do we have to do above and beyond? And that's where the gap analysis comes in.
Perfect. So my understanding is that this is a very good starting point, but is a starting point indeed to work on additionally. Charlotte, thanks a lot for your time today with us, and for your very clear explanation. I very much look forward to meet you on the 18th of November in Paris at our event to speak more about this topic with you and other experts.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank to all our listeners for being with us today. Looking forward to the next Privacy Espresso episode. Bye, everyone. Bye, Charlotte.
Bye.